Good evening. We want to start making our way to the seats. It seems to be about that time. Hope that everybody's had a good Thursday, a good week so far. Let people start to make their way in. Before we begin this evening, if you would go to God with me in prayer. Father God, we just come to you now, praying a prayer of thanks that we have this time set aside, that we can come to meet together, Lord, at the middle of our week, just to worship and to just dive into your word a little bit more. God, we just pray that you be with us on this evening, watch over us, and bless all those who are presenting your word, that they might remember the things which they have studied, and that we might be able to take and use these and apply it into our lives. God, we just thank you for all that you do. We pray that you watch over us, bless us on the rest of this evening and the rest of this week. Guide us as we go from this place, and just bring us back at the next appointed time. Lord, we pray all this in your Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen. The first song this evening will be Thy Word. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. When I feel afraid, I think I've lost my way, still good there right beside me. Nothing will I fear as long as you are near. Please be near me to the end. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. I will not forget your love for me and again. I'll forever be wondering. Jesus, be my guide, hold me to your side. I will love you to the end. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Second song will be the servant song, and we'll sing it twice through. Lord, make me a servant. Lord, make me like you. For you are a servant. Make me one too. Lord, make me a servant. Do what you must do. To make me a servant, us to class.
Okay. Let's see, is this working well? Yeah, it's good. Okay. I'd like to take an opportunity to thank Lou for substituting for me last week. I really appreciate it. He did a good job. He talked about the faith of Abraham and the nature of that faith when he was asked to offer Isaac up on the altar. I would like to reiterate some things about that. One thing is the request that, even though the request that God made to Abraham was unique in all of the Bible, that he had never before and never since asked for human sacrifice. In his law that he gave through Moses, he actually forbade human sacrifice. God had picked out the ram that was going to be used as a substitute for Isaac even before it began. So we know that God was not planning on an actual sacrifice, but it was a test of Abraham's faith. It was unique, but we ought not to think it doesn't apply. We think that, well, that was back then, that was Abraham, and it's not us. Well, let's think about that for a minute. In Luke chapter 14, there was a whole bunch of people starting to follow Jesus, and Jesus turned to them and warned them. In Luke 14, starting in verse 25, now large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he can't be my disciple. You're saying, whoa, well, we know that he's not really talking about hate. God isn't commanding hate, but what he's talking about here is we are presented with these choices. Very often we're presented with these choices between Jesus and our wife, and Jesus and our mother, and Jesus and our father, and Jesus and our children. And wasn't that sort of a choice that God was presenting before Abraham when he asked for the sacrifice? No, I'm keeping my child. Here is Eve, who's just taken a bite out of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and she's offering it to Adam. And what's happening? Well, is it God or is it Eve? I know personally several people who face the challenge of, well, if you keep on with this Jesus stuff, I'm going to divorce you. Well, isn't that the choice? Isn't that a choice? We sacrifice, sometimes we sacrifice family members and friends and relatives, not on an altar, but for the sake of following Jesus. And so the challenge of Abraham, in many ways, is ours too. We come to know and trust that God's love is genuine, his promises are genuine, and we also come and know and trust that anybody who has left father and mother and houses and homes and family has many times over in God's kingdom in this life and in the life to come. So we trust in God's promises, and trusting in God's promises, we go through with what sacrifices that have to be made. We don't actually, do the sacrificing per se, but we accept the fact that there are costs that we need to incur, even though in our choices in following God. So, yeah, the real rubber meets the road kind of our faith needs to be shown in our actions is still true today as much as it was in Abraham's day, and so much as Lou had mentioned last week. At this juncture, in chapter 23 of Genesis, if I can get there, a number of things happen. First part, I'll sort of paraphrase chapter 23 rather than go through the whole procedure. It talks about Sarah's death. Sarah died when she was 127 years old, and the whole chapter is about this process of Abraham obtaining a burial plot for Sarah. And he buys a cave in it's called the Cave of Machpelah, and there's a field that goes along with the cave. It belongs to a man named Ephron, and he goes into this process of buying the field and the cave, and you can see the negotiations such as they are between Abraham and Ephron, and this is the first piece of land that Abraham gets to have in the whole promised land. It's been years since he first came to the promised land. Not a stitch of land was his, and now his wife dies, and what does he do? Well, am I going to go back and bury my wife where we came from? No. I was promised this land by God, and God is going to give it to me. It will take generations, but it's going to be my land and my children's land and my great-great-grandchildren's land, and that's where she's going to be buried, and that's where I'm going to be buried. And so he buys this plot of land. It's an act, in a way, it's an act of faith. You could say, well, it's an act of convenience. You don't want to go 600 miles with your wife's body to find a place to die, But part of it is, I've spent all this time here. This is where I belong. This is where God wanted me. And this is where I'm going to die. And it was where Abraham was buried. It was also where his son Isaac was buried, and his daughter-in-law Rebekah was buried. It was also, and we'll see at the end of in Genesis, that's where Jacob, or also named Israel, demanded that his children swear that he would be buried next to his wife Leah. This was the family plot. And what was happening with Jacob was an act of faith. Here he was in exile over in Egypt because of a famine, and he was saying, this is not the place where we belong. God made promises to me and to all of you guys. My body belongs in Israel. And so it was a request of faith. And then even at the very end of Genesis, you have Joseph saying, all right, I'm going to die and my body's going to be embalmed, but when you guys leave here, just as God promised, I want you to take my body and bury me in the promised land. It wasn't in the Cave of Machpelah, but in another plot of land that Jacob had bought for him. But all of these kind of things were acts of faith on the part of the fathers. We believe God's promises even though we haven't fully seen all of the fruition of it. And that's really the way we go through our life, isn't it? We trust in things that we have not yet seen, but God has promised us. And we live on that basis. And in chapter 24, okay, Sarah has died. Abraham was old and advanced in years, verse 1, chapter 24. And the Lord blessed Abraham in every way. Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge over all he owned, please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live. But you will go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son. The servant said to him, suppose the woman is not willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you came? Then Abraham said to him, beware that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give you this land, he will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife from my son there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from my oath. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master and set out with a variety of good things of his master's in his hand, and he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. He made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. Let me stop here for a second. Back then, and in certain parts of the world, even now, there are arranged marriages. The parents of the man or the woman will contact the parents of the bride or the groom, and there would be an arrangement for marriage. It wasn't always like, it was arbitrary, and the children didn't have some kind of say in the matter. Usually there was some kind of say in the matter, but nevertheless it was a family thing, and it was different than the way we do it here. I mean, the way we do it here is individualistic, isn't it? I want that one. And it sort of went along the way that Samson went for the woman, the Canaanite, the Philistine woman. I want that one for a wife. Go get her. And his parents were saying, well, kid, can't you find any faithful women in Israel? Why do you have to choose this pagan girl? I want her, I want her, I want her. And this is pretty much the way we do it, We have something in common with somebody and we're sexually attracted to them. And that's what we commonly call falling in love. The heart goes ka-tunk, 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 and we have something in common, and we like the person, and we've fallen in love. A friend of mine termed this process as really falling in lust, and all too often that's the way it is. If the parents are involved and the parents are arranging the marriage, what's happening? Well, it's a little bit more dispassionate. The parents should be caring about their children. They should be caring about things like, well, is this guy going to support my daughter, or are they going to live in the in-laws' basement forever and ever? Is he a drunkard, or isn't he? Is he an upright person? Does he believe in God the way we do? Do we have the same values? All sorts of questions like this that parents would ask that we as children wouldn't bother with a lot of times. Now, maybe if we're educated more in the church about finding a good husband or wife, we'd look at it differently, and I hope we do. But, this is what was going on. And Abraham was saying, look, he knows his relatives, he knows his family, he knows that his family has faith in God, which was the big thing for him. And it's a big thing for us and everybody, really, right? And so all these people out here around him, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them were worshiping idols. And we're not believing in God, and we're not having the same values. And he's saying, no, I don't want one of the women here marrying my son. I want you to go and find someone who's going to help him in his faith, and so that he and his children and his grandchildren might have a chance of being faithful to God. And so he takes his, he makes his servant swear to him that he would go and find a wife from among his kinsmen back in Haran. And the servant does swear that, and he gathers up a whole bunch of stuff, 10 camels, and loads them down with all sorts of gifts and precious things. And of course, this is all part of the process. What happens is you have a bride price. You see, this is a family thing. Marriage was a family thing. There's a leaving of father and mother and a cleaving a husband and wife to become a new family. But it was recognized by the families as well that something new was happening here. And so there was a bride price, gifts to the parents of the bride. And then there was a dowry, some kind of gifts that would go along with the bride, who is being taken by the husband. And so this was going to be the process. Now here's the slave, the steward, chief steward of Abraham, that speaks volumes about Abraham's leadership and really the culture of how Abraham was living. Abraham owned slaves or servants. They say servants, but it's not slavery that we think of in terms of what went on here or in other parts of the world even now. This guy was a faithful servant. He was like a lifetime employee who was loyal to his boss. How do I know? Well, he had 10 camel loads of riches, and he could very well have said, well, oath or no oath, I'm going off to the Bermudas and I'm going to live it up and I'm never going to see this guy anymore. But he didn't. Why? Because he was loyal to Abraham. Abraham had earned his loyalty, and he was giving his loyalty to Abraham, and he was going to be faithful about it. That's probably why he became chief steward, because he was faithful. And not only that, and we're going to find out, I'll read the next 3 verses, and we find out that not only did Abraham inspire loyalty to himself, but Abraham also inspired loyalty to God and faith in God in this servant. Here is the servant. They get up to where they're going, and then in verse 12 he prays. And this is the servant praying. He said, "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I'm standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now may it be that the girl to whom I say, 'Please let down your jar so that I may drink,' and who answers, 'Drink, and I will water your camels also,' may she be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown loving kindness to my master." Now, how would this be a sign to the servant? I mean, would it be a very likely sort of a thing? How would he know God's hand was involved in this? Pardon? He prayed about it, yes. He prayed about it. And Abraham said that God was going to send his angel before him and make it a success. So he's confident that God was going to do something. And he was proposing this suggestion to God, asking that this might be a sign that this is the one. Now, pardon? He didn't overthink it. Yeah. 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 And, what was the likelihood? Well, we don't know what the likelihood would be, but there was a city there, and there were relatives of Abraham in the city, and the young women from the city were going to start streaming out to this well. And what are the chances of the particular one that he asked, having never met any one of them, ask one of them for a drink, and that be this specific relative of Abraham? It's, it could happen, but it's not really that likely. I mean, if it's a small town, maybe it's 1 out of 100, or 1 out of 50, but it's not a guaranteed thing at all. And certainly him asking this, it involves God's providence in it. He's asking God for his providential guidance. It isn't necessary that God was going to do that. He may have to interview everybody in the city in order to get the job done. We don't know. But he's asking God to streamline the process, you see. And so he does. Notice what he asks for also makes sense. And it makes sense because he's being loyal to his master and kind to his master's son. If you're picking out a wife for your son, would you want to choose a woman that you would go up to and say, "Well, would you give me a drink of water?" And she just said, "Well, you got 2 feet, go and get your own"? I mean, here's a challenge. Here's sort of a challenge of character and energy and hospitality that the servant is proposing also. He wants a girl that would be hospitable and generous and kind and willing to serve. Yes. It would be an encouragement for the family, yes. I'm sorry. For the famine? Oh, for the camels, that's right. I forgot, I didn't mention that. Draw water for me, but also the camels. And what's that? That's going the extra mile, isn't it? Somebody asks you to go to 1 mile, go 1 mile, and you go 1 mile, but, I'll go another mile. And that was the kind of woman he was looking for his master's son. And so this was the test. So what are the chances of finding a woman who would do that? And what are the chances of finding a woman who would do that who is also a relative of Abraham? We don't know. We don't know, but it's not exactly a sure bet. But having to pray to God and looking for a sign, it'd be a very good indication that God was putting you on the right path if that's the way it worked. Sometimes we ask for God's for a sign, but we ought to be thinking about it, what we ask for a sign. It ought to make sense, and it ought to fit in with the overall picture of things, shouldn't it? It's not exactly like, "Oh Lord, I really need this power drill. If nobody's looking, I'll put it in my pocket and walk out of the store, and that's my sign." You can't do that kind of thing. You have to do something that's in line with God's will and in line with His plans. And typically what we really need to do is use the skill we have in decision making and the knowledge of his will to narrow things down too. Think about the choice of a replacement for Judas that the apostles made in Acts chapter 1. There were qualifications. Those qualifications had to be met, otherwise, there really wouldn't be apostles, okay? They'd be choosing wrongly. So their qualifications, they find people with the qualifications, but there was only one position. But you can't make a decision between those two because both meet the qualifications, so how do you do it? Whose will is it? Well, they drew straws. And they prayed and they expected that God would make it clear how it would be. Unfortunately, sometimes what we do is we just draw straws and we don't narrow the possibilities down and we don't think it through. And that's not fair, and God isn't necessarily going to go along with that. And if we get into a choice where the choice is so close that we're having a tough time, well, we can have pretty good confidence that it's going to turn out fairly well, won't we? So anyway, here's the proposal. And I'm not going to, let's see, maybe, I'll read the actual event, and then I won't read all of the repeat of the event later. In verse 15, before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had relations with her. And she went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, "Please, let me drink a little water from your jar." She said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. Now when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I'll draw water for your camels until they have finished drinking." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. Meanwhile, the man was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. He's thinking, wow, is this the one? This is just the thing I prayed for. Is this the one? Is this the one? And then when the camels, verse 22, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing 1/2 shekel and 2 bracelets for her wrists, weighing 10 shekels in gold, and said, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." And again she said to him, "We have plenty of both straw and feed, and room to lodge in." Then the man bowed low and worshipped the Lord. He said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brothers." Then he had said this, apparently he'd said this out loud, and she ran back to her household and told her brother what had happened. And the brothers saw believed her. He saw the gold, the gold ring in her nose and the bracelets and everything. And wow, where is he? Why didn't you bring him? And he went out and he got the servant, brought the servant into the house. And let's see, verse 31. This is Laban, Rebekah's brother. "Come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I prepared the house and a place for the camels?" So the man entered the house, and Laban unloaded the camels and gave straw and feed to the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. But when food was set before him to eat, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my business." And Laban said, "Speak on." So Rebekah Rebecca comes back. She tells what had happened. Laban welcomes the servant into the house and to take him in for the night and all of that. And just before they're about to eat, Abraham's servant says, well, I'm not going to eat until I've done my business. And so he recounts the fact that that he's a servant of Abraham. Abraham had a child in his old age, and that that child, Isaac, was wealthy and had all sorts of flocks and riches and everything. And of course, that's very believable considering the gifts that the servant had already given Rebecca, and also the fact that there were all of these camels loaded down with all sorts of goodies. And so, yeah, this proposed, this guy is wealthy, the relative is wealthy, and then he recites the prayer that he made, and the conditions of the prayer and the sign that he made, and how Abraham had prophesied that God would send his angel ahead, and recounted the whole story. And then in verse 45, before I had finished speaking in my heart, in verse 45, he recounts how Rebecca had fulfilled the sign that he had asked for, that she actually went and provided the water. So this was evidence to Rebecca's brother and her family that God's hand was in the selection. And we know this from verses 49 and following. Now, if you are going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, let me know, that I may turn to the right or to the left. In other words, he's saying, look, if you're willing to give this girl in marriage to my master's son, tell me yes. If not, let me go free and look for another one. And Laban, in verse 50, and Bethuel, that would be Rebekah's father, replied, the matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you good or bad. The fact of the sign, combined with the prayer, the sign, the assignment of Abraham to that there would be an angel and that sort of thing. He said, hey, look, this is too coincidental not to be the Lord's hand in this. So how dare we say no, this is God's will. So the family believed in God, and they believed that the sign that God had provided was a genuine thing. So they weren't going to object to it. They would, however, later on ask the girl, well, are you willing to go? And she said yes. They were in verse 51. Here's Rebekah before you. Take her and go. Let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. Then when Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. The servant brought out articles of silver and of gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her brother and to her mother. He and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night. When they arose in the morning, he said, send me away to my master. But her brother and her mother said, let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10. Afterwards she may go. He said, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. And they said, we'll call the girl and consult her wishes. Then they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. Thus they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servant and his men. They blessed Rebekah and said to her, may you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. Of course, this is going to be right in line with the promises God made Abraham. Then Rebekah rose with her maids. They mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Again, this is not exactly the way we would do things. arrange a marriage, and she's saying yes to a marriage to a person she had never met. A couple of aspects I could point out, but I don't, I think there's some good things and there's some maybe not so good things, depending on how reliable your parents are and how reliable your servants are and so on. Something about back then was if you were a woman, your whole future was wrapped up and your whole survival was wrapped up in your marriage and whether you would have children. If you didn't have a husband, you're going to be living in your father's household until your father died, but then you're hoping that you have brothers who would take you in. A woman living on her own, making a living on her own, was very rare and very difficult. Having children was the equivalent of having Social Security and a retirement income. There wasn't any Social Security, there wasn't any retirement plans or 401ks or anything like that. The only way you survived when you got too old to work is if you had children who loved you, or grandchildren who loved you and who would take care of you. So in a way, it was, yes, you're looking for a husband, but you're not necessarily just looking for romance, you're looking for a position in life as a wife and a mother, and there was a role emphasis going on here as well. Nowadays, we all want our own roles, and we don't want necessarily the role of a husband or a wife or a father or a mother. We want our role. And for people, a husband and wife, to become one flesh and to stick together, there has to be more than just a selfish desire to go your own way. You do have to work together as a unit and see things in a bigger picture than just we're compatible for now, and when things don't work out, we can find somebody else that goes along with our plans. So it's different. And I'm not saying we ought to go all the way back to that, but I do think we've gone too far in the individualistic realm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our world today is so built on selfishness. I don't mean that in such a bad way. We've been kind of bent to this idea of self-identity so much.
Mm-hmm.
When you go back and look at if you've been to other countries that still have more of a tribal kind of makeup,
mm-hmm.
the identity is within the tribe. It's not within the state. It's not within the country. It's not within, and that's where we've always had difficulty, even in the military going in, is understanding that cultural difference. The identity is within the tribe and the smaller group, or that family element. And that's where the honor is linked in. It's not the honor of oneself, it's what's provided to the family unit, and that's what makes it cohesive. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a greater, it's very respectful. And when you really understand the dynamic, it kind of blows you away. And you can really see why the devil wants to fracture everything down mm-hmm. into individualism.
Yes, very well put. I appreciate that. We look so much for our own satisfaction and our own. Satisfaction is probably the best word for it. And we wondered about how can something like that have any kind of satisfaction in it, when really it does and can and does happen. I remember talking with some people from Korea, members of the church, and they talked about arranged marriages and so on, and they said that they had a saying, a cold pot can be brought to a boil. It was, Isaac and Rebekah didn't know each other, and here they were, The marriage had already been arranged, and all that was left was for Isaac to take her into his tent. And to them to assume the role of husband and wife when they hadn't even met. But in a way, it's sort of like Taviev in The Fiddle on the Roof, isn't it? Oh, did I steal it? Was that what you were going to say? Yeah. Do you love me? Taviev was trying to deal with this whole thing because her first oldest daughter was really pressuring to say no to the matchmaker to pick somebody else. And that was hard for Taviev to swallow. But yeah, the guy was a good worker, and it was probably his second best choice, even though the butcher would have been nicer for him. And then the other daughters were looking more for the romance angle and his love, what. And he turns to his wife. He was a product of a arranged marriage, and he said, well, do you love me? I wash your clothes, I raise your children, I cook your food, I do this and I do that and I do this, but do you love me? Well, yes, she loved him. A cold pot grew warm, and it was because they were serving each other. And that's the key. It was because they were serving each other that they grew to love each other. When you invest of yourself in serving somebody, you come to value them all the more. And the more you invest, the more you value. Doesn't that happen with kids? I mean, that little baby can't mow the lawn. But you changed the diapers and you taught them how to speak, and all you've invested so much. They're precious to you, and that's the way it works. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because normally she would be told, you're going to marry this guy, go.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that she agreed to that, that's very significant.
I think it was, yes.
Also, the fact that the servant, he didn't accept the fact when they told him 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't accept that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of borderline disrespectful. But he knew that he had a mission to complete.
Mm-hmm.
He said he had a mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think those are a couple of significant points.
Yeah, that's very good. Very good. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I could add to my brother's comments there. I want to bring it back even a little further. Abraham had a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Through that, the servant had a relationship with
Yes.
God. In that, he went going searching for the wife for Isaac. Isaac had a relationship with God. The brother and mother of Rebekah had a relationship
Yes.
with God.
Yes.
Rebekah had a relationship with God. That's the key, I think, in all of this. And I think when we understand that marriage, the best marriage that you can ever have is a man and a woman in a relationship with God.
Yes.
That's,
Amen.
that's what I see whenever we read this.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Most definitely. Thank you for bringing that out and to underline it, just in case it wasn't recorded. The important part was the fact that they both had a relationship to God. That was the point that Abraham was shooting for. That was what God was arranging here. And that is what Isaac and Rebekah actually did have. And that's really the key to making any kind of relationship, and especially a marriage, work. It's with that mutual relationship to God that will enable us to work out anything else we need to work out between us as a husband and wife. Without that, it's going to be a tug of war and a power struggle, typically. Rex, do you?
Yeah, I thought something was interesting is when they approach
Mm-hmm.
where Isaac is,
Mm-hmm.
and she doesn't wear a veil all the time.
Uh-huh.
When they approach where Isaac is,
Mm-hmm.
she finds out that's who she's going to marry. This
So,
puts the veil
What is she like?
Is he a man of character going to go through with this without having, does he have the character she had? She has a character that was willing to go through with what was right,
Mm-hmm.
even though she'd never seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Was he that same man of character?
Yes. And he did. And he did. And they did grow to love one another. The account of their meeting is in 62 to the end of the chapter. I'm running low on time, but I'm going to finish the chapter, and that's good. Now Isaac had come from going to Beer Lahai Roy, for he was living in the Negev, that's the southern region. Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. She said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" The servant said, "He is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. So Isaac was filled in on the signs and the whole business as far as the choices that were made and how the servant made the choices, apparently. He did all the things that had been done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And so Isaac and Rebekah were married, and they came to love one another. And we'll talk more about their life together from here on. It's going to be centered more on Isaac and then their children from this point on. There's an old, I might as well tell the old joke, maybe you've heard it. There's one place in the Bible that shows an example of smoking. It's only in the King James version, but in verse 64, it says that when Rebekah saw Isaac, she lit off her camel. With that groaner, I'll stop before it gets bad. Have a good night. Thank you.